Madam Secretary, will you call the roll?
Senator Stein. Senator Price.
Here.
Present. Senator Owing.
Present.
Present. Senator Priestley.
Here.
Present. Senator Hinchkins.
Here.
Present. Senator Lambert.
Present.
Present. Senator Connick.
Here.
Present. Yes, 6 members.
6 members present and a quorum. There's a few announcements before we get started. Please silence your cell phones. If you must take a call, please step outside of the committee room. If you wish to give testimony, please fill out a witness card completely and sign it and hand it to the Sergeant-at-Arms. Your signature is an affirmation that the testimony you give is true. Please be aware that personal information you give on this card is subject to public disclosure. Green cards are for support, red cards are in opposition, white cards are for informational purposes only, and blue cards are for certified designees of elected officials. And we have just one bill on the agenda today, and that is Senate Bill 275 by myself, Senator Lambert. Last meeting, we had the bill and we made some substantial amendments to the bill, and then we decided to report it by a substitute bill, which made it much clearer, and that way people could read the bill and get a better idea of what the bill actually says instead of piecing the amendments in. So I move to reconsider the vote by which amendment set number 1157 was adopted to put the bill in proper form. And hearing no objection, the bill, I move now to adopt the substitute bill, which is Bill 275, which should have been made public yesterday. So what we will do now is discuss, and seeing no objection, Senate Bill 275 is adopted by substitute. And basically what this bill does is it just kind of brings in some monitoring regulation and reliability for community monitoring systems, which require certain information to be present in order for it to be really used and make sure we have credible evidence. And I think we have a few people here to testify on behalf of the bill. And let's see, do we have green cards? All right. All right, first we have Mr. Brian Landry with the Louisiana Chemical Association and is present and would like to speak. Mr. Landry?
Thank you, Mr.
So I'm sure you're, all right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll just say a few words. I know that we had a little bit of discussions over the last week, but I want to thank the committee for your patience for bringing the bill in its proper posture for today. I want to make sure that we had a nice week later that everyone got to look at the bill, and just especially since we were layering a lot of federal standards and some into the state statute. I know it's an arduous task, and just want to say thank you to the attorneys for getting everything put together. We really do appreciate it. And what we've noticed over the course of a couple of years is that we're seeing a lot of flow of private and public funds, federal grant money as well, to help sponsor community air monitoring systems. And as organizations are applying and receiving these grants and they're starting to do some air monitoring, our members at LCA has asked us that we ensure that some federal standards and some state standards are adhered to when that data is being collected for that air monitoring. And so in this specific bill that we're requesting that EPA and DEQ's methodology is definitely followed during that data collection. And last week you heard from a couple of the opponents, and it was brief since the bill wasn't in the proper posture, but we hope that after looking at over the bill and having seen the amendments, that their opposition would be lifted. And I'd like to address some of the concerns that they had brought up in the meeting last week. And number one, nothing in this bill will stop any citizen or any organization from collecting or publishing any data whatsoever. Whether the EPA standards are adhered to or not, this bill does not deter or hamper anyone from collecting that data or even sharing that data. The First Amendment is protected in this bill, and good data and bad data are equally protected. You can publish any of the data at any time. What we are trying to do is make sure that there's standards that are implemented in this bill. None of it is new. There's no more burdensome than any other current law and in place at the federal level. And then we just want to commend, I know Lean had been here. Lean is actually one of those organizations that received some funding to do community air monitoring, and they'll be commended for the work that they are doing, and they're adhering to EPA and DEQ standards and that data collection practice. But we just want to ensure that any community monitoring and any of that air monitoring collected and given to DEQ for any future purpose is accurate and definitely correct. So if anybody wanted to challenge a permit, we want DEQ and would want DEQ to initiate some enforcement proceedings. Then we want to make sure that data that they use to support it must be accurate and correct. And also, we just want to make sure to ensure that the data is not the sole source of pulling a permit or filing an injunction for any of our facilities. And if there is going to be any regulatory requirements for monitoring, we want to make sure that we have data integrity, like training on the equipment, routine calibrations, updating software, hardware updates as well. And we know that DEQ definitely has the trained personnel do that routine maintenance, do the calibrations, do the updates. And we want to make sure the community air monitoring should be the first step, but not the final judgment when it comes to those injunctions. The bill before you and the air quality standards that we spell out, we want to make sure it also aligns with how EPA uses tools for environmental justice, screening, and monitoring. The EPA tools are not used for official regulatory interpretations. They are simply used for context and for community engagement. So those are just a few words that, a few of the points that I wanted to make. And like I said, we want to restate that nothing in this bill will deter, hamper, or stop any community air monitoring by individuals or privately or publicly funded organizations. That can go forward. And I'll halt for any questions.
I don't see any questions. We also have Takesha Collins-Wright.
Hi, that's me. I'm going to defer to Danny.
All right.
I'm here as well.
Daniel Bosch is present and would like to speak. All right, Mr. Bosch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I don't have much to add beyond what Brian has covered, but just to introduce myself, I'm Danny Bosch, and I work with King Miller and represent LCA. We assisted with drafting this legislation. The main goals of the legislation would be that when data is used in a regulatory context, it meet certain standards. Those standards are nothing new. They are federal standards and state standards based on federal standards for data quality assurance. That's what the bill does. It does not preclude anyone from publishing data, from conducting monitoring, or from sharing that information with the department. It just, what the bill sets in place are parameters by which the data may be used in a regulatory setting. In other words, in an enforcement action or in any case where there may be consideration of a criteria or some way to control pollution in the community. That's basically what the bill does. I'm happy to answer any technical questions you have.
All right, so Mr. Bosch, and I guess I'll have a few, and that's what my understanding of it is. Basically, is just to make sure that the evidence that is presented is going to be credible, that it's tested and so forth, is met with specifications where you're just not throwing anything up against the wall. Is that accurate?
That is correct. And these are standards that are also in place within the trainings that EPA conducts with community air monitoring programs. They are considered basics of those program trainings.
I don't see any questions. All right. And Ms. Wright, so you have, do you want to add anything since?
Sure. I don't
If
want
you'll
to
just state your name too for the record.
to Keisha Collins Wright on behalf of Louisiana Chemical Association. I don't think I want to belabor the point. I think Brian and Danny have made it perfectly well. I think the idea here for this bill really is just data integrity and just accuracy. If you're going to use this information for further purpose, if you're trying to impact a third party, then we think the data should be accurate and correct. And so this is just laying out already existing state and federal standards that people see today.
All right, thank you. Also in favor of the bill, though not wishing to speak, is Jimmy Berlin. Blanche Gallagher, present but not wishing to speak. Ashley Kane, present and support but not wishing to speak. Lauren Hayden, present and support but does not wish to speak. All right, we have a question from Senator Hinchkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, just quick on this. So to clarify, if I'm in a public group, local group that's collecting data on this thing, and if it doesn't meet these standards, there's nothing that says I can't go to the newspaper with my data and anything else. And if my data collection meets these standards, it can actually be used in the hearing or whatever would be. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, it wouldn't be the sole source is what we're.
You're just asking not be the sole source for the solution.
And in this, we can't, we can defend all we want. You could have bad data, and like you said, you could have a bad reading and go to the newspaper. You can have a good reading and go to the newspaper. In either one, the key here is that it would be most of the time with air monitoring systems. If there was some kind of trigger, they do go to the regulatory agency, which is DEQ, which would be notified, and then they have a certain process that they have to adhere to. Well, we wanted to make sure that's not the sole source piece of that you have to have credible and accurate data. Having followed EPA standards helps increase that credibility versus hearsay or someone saying, I had a bad smell
I live next door and.
Yeah, and so we just wanted to make sure that data is credible and accurate to the best of the standards that we are laying out before them, but it doesn't stop any data being published or brought to the newspaper or posted on Facebook
Blogged
or a blog. We're expecting that. We are already seeing that, and that's just something that we're going to have to go work through as representing many members, many large chemical manufacturers. But we just want to make sure if any data goes forward and there's any injunction, pulling of a permit, that we have some standards in place.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Hinchkins. All right, we have a number of people in opposition, and I'm sorry, Senator Connick.
Good afternoon.
good afternoon.
I have a scenario. What if all the methods were followed by the third party, and there's a finding there that says excess chemicals have been emitted? Does DEQ, under this law, have to act on that?
I think that DEQ can't use that as a sole source. That's basically what we're saying. DEQ still has their processes that they have to go through. They have to follow. They have the trained personnel. They have the accurate sourcing monitoring that they use, that they calibrate, that they have maintained. So DEQ still has to follow up with that. And I think that's currently what happens with community air monitoring currently.
All right, so if DEQ does not want to take action on it or investigate, they don't have to.
I think it's their regulatory. I mean, I know that you've had a couple of back and forth with DEQ before within your local district, but I think they've come out and investigated some of the issues and complaints that you've had from your constituents. I think they've been pretty. I can't speak for them,
But the bottom line is, if DEQ doesn't want to take action based on the findings of a non-governmental entity, they don't have to. They may.
They may.
All right, thanks.
All right, I see no other questions. And opposition to the bill, present and wishing to speak is Kathy Wascom. Ms. Wascom. Also, we have Caitlin Hunter, present and would like to speak in opposition. Let's see if y'all two ladies would come up to the table.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Kathy Wascom, representing Louisiana Environmental Action Network. I'm going to, after listening to the testimony of the proponents of the legislation, I'm going to have to say not quite, because this is creating a new chapter in our environmental laws. It is also holding community groups to the same standard that you would hold DEQ. So that chapter is, let's see, 40 CFR Part 50. So that's DEQ has been delegated by EPA to do the air program for the state. So the idea that you could have a community group using the same standards as EPA for that program is pretty absurd. You can have EPA-approved technology to use, which would community groups would be able to learn how to use and would be able to operate. I'm going to read a few things, if I could, because in 2022, the U.S. EPA invested $53 million to support community air monitoring across the country. Close to $2.5 million came to Louisiana. This funding has supported the deployment of the latest air monitoring technology both in Louisiana and throughout the country. Utilization of this technology with federal funding requires the approval of a quality assurance plan. Lower-cost sensor technology has been widely adopted by industries and non-governmental organizations working to measure air quality. None of these would meet the standard in SB 275 40 CFR Part 50. SB 275 undermines millions of dollars of investment by making it the law for LDEQ not to consider the majority of the data being produced by community air monitoring programs. LEAN, which is the organization that I represent, received $500,000 from EPA funding and has spent approximately $250,000 to contract with an air quality company that hired local Louisiana drivers to measure air quality with mobile monitoring vehicles. And this technology was developed in partnership with the EPA research program. Now, I'm going to, I have copies for the committee. This is a letter from EPA. It was sent to Senator Fields by his request. I'll just read part of it to you. And it says, we appreciate the opportunity to review the bill and provide comments to your office. Senate Bill 275, if passed, would add a new chapter to Title 30 of the Louisiana Revised Statutes that purports to establish state standards for community air monitoring program operated by entities and limits the use, disclosure, or dissemination of information that does not meet the specifications. Well, I think From my understanding, that has been eliminated. Among other issues, the EPA has concerns that the bill may preclude the use of credible evidence to determine compliance under the Clean Air Act and may conflict with Louisiana's federally approved Title V and state implementation programs. We refer you to EPA's credible evidence revisions rule adopted in 1997. And you can go ahead and read the rest of it yourself. But it says that for this purpose of submitting compliance certifications or establishing whether or not a person has violated or is in violation of any standard, and it goes into CFR 51. To the extent that the Louisiana Senate Bill 275 purports to limit the use of community monitoring data that the EPA and LDEQ would deem to be credible evidence for clean air compliance demonstration or clean air enforcement, the bill would be inconsistent with federal law. We just received this yesterday from the EPA. The reason we're opposing this is because we've been trying for 10 years at least to get air monitoring done, to get air monitors either put up by DEQ, to be required by the companies, and it has, we've never been able to get anything passed, and we also had fiscal notes associated with a lot of, with this legislation that DEQ didn't have the people to monitor the monitors, that it would cost too much money. We were sent to finance. The communities are simply trying to know what's in the air that they breathe. They cannot they cannot use what DEQ would use. They are community groups who feel somewhat abandoned in what's in the air. So we are trying to help them do that. This diminishes our ability and also the community by saying that this is somehow not credible, that even though we have the approval of EPA, we're going to have some low-tech equipment that communities will have to use. And this is, and we want that to be considered also. And looking at it, we have no police power. We're not able to find anybody to do anything like that. We are simply trying to find out what is in the air. And that's not an unreasonable scenario. And to accept it as credible, to call up our agencies and to say, please investigate this, please look at this. And if there is not an air monitor from DEQ or one of the plants don't have nearby air monitors, I don't know how that can be verified, but we have long been trying to get air monitoring in this state, especially with all the industry we have here. And I'll let other people speak who actually live on the fence line. And anyway, that's my testimony so far.
And I guess I mean, I'm reading your letter and looking at the bill. This bill doesn't stop you from doing your testing, correct? For your community, it doesn't stop it.
Go ahead and do that, but the standards established for community air monitoring program are the same standards that DEQ has for its air monitoring program. The community groups will never be able to meet that type of standard because simply we're not DEQ. When you put a standard in place that no community can reach, that says it's not, I mean, you're creating a new chapter, and according to the EPA letter we had, this may be in violation of, they think it may be in violation of federal law, creating this another chapter to our revised statutes, creating standards that are impossible for community groups to meet. Otherwise, we would be the DEQ. I mean, this is the standards that they are using for air monitoring. And what we would really, really like is for the department to require air monitors from some of the facilities, so that if Community X is using a canister and finds something in the air, and there are no monitors from DEQ, or there's no plant monitors nearby, and it's an unreported exceedance, there's no verification for that. And I assume DEQ, if it's reported to them, may or may not go out and test. And as we all know, sometimes the air, if the mammal comes out, 4 or 5 hours later or the next day, the problem may not be there at that exact time. So it's a verification process, and it's more air monitors needed, and it's more verification needed. And that is simply why we are opposing this, because you set a standard that the communities cannot meet. We can still do our programs. We can still put it on the out on the internet for everyone to see. Whether or not DEQ follows up is optional, because according to this, we do not meet that standard.
But isn't it important to have, wouldn't you agree with me that you want to have credible evidence that in the instance that you may have a canister, whatever you have?
Exactly. How are you going to do that?
Well, and that's maybe why you have to have credible evidence, which you have to have the people who are doing it may have to be qualified. You need to know which way the wind's coming from. There's a lot of factors, and I think what this does, it basically says we're not going to look at just one thing, and we're looking at the totality of it, and it's credible evidence. Wouldn't you agree with that?
No, I don't.
Would
it's
you?
Setting a standard that
But
is,
isn't the standard that we want is to be accurate
the standard
information?
is what DEQ has to have in order to qualify to run the air program for the state. Now, no community is going to be able to be a DEQ, have the technology and the ability to be a DEQ. We're talking about communities along the river parishes. People smell things. They want to know what's going on. Their eyes may burn. It may be an ammonia release. Whatever they have concerns. This sets up a standard that is unreasonable that communities can never meet. And that's simply what it's doing. As the LCA representative said, we can still do what we do. We can still publish what we publish, but that standard is though we were DEQ. And that if you read the DEQ letter, it talks about that the way the legislation, the way they looked at it, it may violate federal law, and it, in my opinion, we're going to look at delegation of the air program. You can't just keep ignoring what's going on. You can't. The pleas of the folks with whom we work are consistent. Find some way to help us. And so we've been trying to do that, and trying not just in the legislative arena, but in the grants and having programs. So I don't know what else to tell you other than that, we are glad to work in a collaborative way with the chemical companies and the programs, but to put this out there is, in my opinion, not a good faith effort for a collaborative with the community groups who have to live next to many of these facilities and expanding facilities, more and more facilities coming into this state. And please remember that because a facility gets a permit from the state is telling you, you have permission to pollute. You have permission to have so many emissions. And when you have a group, as we do in many of communities, of adjacent facilities and adjacent facilities and adjacent facilities, it is very concerning. And all we're trying to do is have some knowledge of what is in the air, give it to DEQ, and not set a standard for the state that no community group, even one as prominent as Lean, can have ever enough money or ability or whatever to meet the same standards as DEQ, and that's why we rely on our agencies to protect us. That's,
So what you're saying is you trust DEQ's test more than you trust some of the community monitoring. Is that what I'm getting from you?
no, sir, that's not. You're setting the community, you're setting a standard for the community that is the same standard as DEQ. Is that what you want to do in your bill? You set a standard for a community along the River Parish to meet the same standards as DEQ would use in the air monitoring program.
Is that like for enforcement and of actions you're talking about?
This is creating a community monitoring.
Right, that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
I mean, I
So-
understand that, but we're talking about either challenges to permits or fines or penalties or so.
Well, you'll be.
I mean, is it
You'll be able to anything that people find in the communities using the technology available will be given to DEQ. Whether or not DEQ chooses to act on that is up to them. Whether or not it can be verified with so few air monitoring monitors, or whether or not it can be verified by a DEQ standard, by whether one of the air monitors they have or whether one of the facilities that's supposed to, report if there's an exceedance or something. We don't know. We don't know if any of that can be verified, but we do our best to have technology that communities can use and give to the DEQ. It will be up to the DEQ whether or not they act on it. And but to set a standard that no community can meet, why would you do that? Why are we setting community air monitoring standards? You have to ask why, if there's no community can meet that standard. And why would you do that? You can read the letter from the EPA yourself, but that's simply, there's got to be a why. Why would you do this? We use, we're very transparent in what we do and anything, and none of the communities have any ability to do anything to the facilities. They can't fine them. They can't even ask them what's going on. I mean, they could try, but when you don't have any power other than to go to your agency or to your police jury or to your Metro Council or whatever, why are you doing this? What is the reason for the bill? So.
All right. Yes, ma'am, I think you're up next. you'd just identify yourself, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Kate Lyon Hunter, and I represent RISE St. James, Louisiana, where I'm an attorney and the research and policy coordinator. RISE is a faith-based grassroots organization that is fighting for environmental justice as we work to defeat the proliferation of petrochemical industries in Cancer Alley and all fence line communities throughout the state. Our members live and work throughout Cancer Alley. To start off, because I hear this too often, Cancer Alley is not a myth. Quoting from a 2022 study by Terrell and St. Julian, in absolute terms, more pounds of industrial toxic air pollution are released annually in Louisiana than any other state, based on 2019 data from the EPA. These emissions translate to a disproportionate burden of health risks for Louisiana's industrialized neighborhood. Nearly every census tract between Baton Rouge and New Orleans ranks in the top 5% nationally for cancer risk from toxic air pollution and in the top 10% for respiratory hazards. They concluded that our study provides evidence that toxic air pollution is a significant driver of cancer rates in Louisiana's most vulnerable communities. Let me take a moment to set the stage for what air monitoring currently looks like in Cancer Alley and what current air monitors from LDEQ measure. There's 6 criteria pollutants under NAAQS, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards that EPA sets, and all states are required to take action to ensure that air quality for these pollutants remains below that set level. These 6 criteria pollutants are ozone, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter 2.5 and 10, nitrous oxide, carbon monoxide, and lead. Across Cancer Alley, LDEQ has only 7 air monitors in place, most of which measure only one of these criteria pollutants, not multiple. For example, the monitors in Convent and Garyville measure only ozone. The monitor in Laplace measures only lead. And the monitor in Geismar measures only PM 2.5. Not all of these monitors are real time, meaning that they do not always report data that is immediately accessible to the community. To give some comparison, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality has 7 monitors in just the city of Corpus Christi alone, and 14 in the Beaumont area, most of which are real time. There is a disparity in where plants and monitors are located. St. James Parish is roughly 50-50 in terms of black and white citizens. The 4th and 5th districts are 53% and 88% black, compared to districts 2 and 3, which are 55% and 78% white. Since 1958, 20 of 24 petrochemical plants constructed in St. James Parish have been built in the 4th and 5th districts. Despite the concentration of heavy industry, there are no LDEQ air monitors in the 4th and 5th districts. Although the criteria pollutants I just mentioned do have human health effects, especially in regards to causing or worsening asthma, the real drivers of cancer and other disease are hazardous air pollutants, also called HAPs or air toxics. These are the chemicals that require Title V air permits because of their toxic nature on human, animal, and environmental health. LDEQ currently conducts no air monitoring for these air toxics, despite the enormous number of them that are emitted constantly into the air and water of Cancer Alley and the state. Nearly all the census tracts that compose Cancer Alley are in the top 5% nationally for cancer risk because of these hazardous pollutants. Some of them that affect St. James Parish and RISE members the most include ethylene oxide, chloroprene, and vinyl chloride, all 3 of which are carcinogenic, causing cancer in humans. LDEQ does not conduct air monitoring for any of these chemicals to ensure that industry is not exceeding its permits or that the ambient air is safe to breathe. LDEQ received a grant to install a state-of-the-art air monitor through EPA. It was only last week installed on the west bank of St. James Parish, covering the 5th District and the communities of Welcome, Freetown, St. James, Moonshine, and Vacherie, where many RISE members live and work. We had to personally petition Dr. Nance to get this monitor installed. It was given to LDEQ. They dragged their heels on getting it installed. We had to personally ask our EPA administrator to make sure it got installed, and it just did last week. In short, LDEQ is not doing its constitutional mandate under the public trust doctrine to protect our air from hazardous pollution. That's why nonprofit groups like LEAN and RISE St. James, Louisiana, and others have to step up to fill the gap. But this bill makes us become LDEQ to actually do their job for them by holding us to the same standards that LDEQ with an EPA mandate is held to. Where air quality is certainly the worst for the fence line communities nearest to the plants, These air toxics travel far beyond their point sources. When the Marathon Garyville refinery exploded last August, the plume was visible on satellite imagery reaching at least as far as 40 miles away. The carcinogenic chloroprene emitted from the Danka DuPont facility in Laplace has been detected at least as far away as Lake Maurepas. It's at least 10 miles. Laplace is 25 miles from New Orleans and less than 50 from Baton Rouge. When Dow Plaquemines' ethylene oxide unit exploded last summer, we have no idea how far the ethylene oxide plume traveled because LDEQ has no air monitors that can detect it. Dow Plaquemines is visible from this building. Air quality affects all of us, but it doesn't affect all of us equally. This bill keeps citizens across Louisiana, not just Cancer Alley, further in the dark about what they are breathing. If industry is emitting levels of pollution that are safe and within their permits, as they and LDEQ claim time and time again, then why would this bill seek to limit the power that people have to monitor their own air and confirm what we're being told? The easy answer is that the air in Cancer Alley is not safe to breathe, and the amendments introduced last week by the LCA representative are designed not to produce better data, but to further shield polluting industry from the repercussions of their emissions. We most strongly object to the Amendment 39, which states that evidence of air pollution collected from state-of-the-art, EPA-approved monitors that's been validated in an accredited laboratory cannot be sufficient to bring action against a polluter or LDEQ. What else could possibly needed to have a sufficiency of evidence? We don't object to having standards of equipment for monitors, but if we take the time and money to get these types of monitors, we then need to have the power to do something with the data we work so hard to collect. I want to address a couple comments that I heard as well. To go back to Senator, I'm sorry, I don't have to pronounce your last name, Henskins? Henskins, thank you. Talking about the constitutionality of this, about whether or not we'd be able to publish things in newspapers, if we'd be able to talk about data that we collect that doesn't meet these standards. I worked on a study. We published data on particulate matter that used devices that were not in compliance with this bill, but this is places where there is no particulate matter monitoring in place. I used this in this study to determine particulate matter that already exists in St. James Parish, especially where the proposed Formosa Plastics plant would be built. We are in active litigation, Rice St. James and many other groups in active litigation with LDEQ and Formosa Plastics about the proposed air permits there. Looking at the language of the bill itself, this is section 2383.10. Any data produced from community air monitoring programs, I paraphrase a little bit, community air monitoring programs not in compliance shall not be used in support of bringing civil actions. This in support of is vague language here. There's nothing that says that it couldn't be interpreted that me putting out a study talking about particulate matter, we publish often in newspapers, on podcasts, radio, talking about these studies that we generate that could be linked to this litigation that we're in. Interpreting this as in support of is not a stretch. I want to address Senator Connick's comments about DEQ, what would they do with this data if we collect it? Like I've said, DEQ doesn't have another source of data for this. What community groups are able to generate is oftentimes the only source of data that's in that area. As you mentioned earlier, Kathy, that when an incident happens, it can take DEQ hours or days to even come out, especially if this is a toxic release event like we saw at Dow Plaquemines exploding. The ethylene oxide plume will travel away within a matter of hours, but at the site and in the plume location, you need that real-time air tracking. Going out days later doesn't show what was that community exposed to at the time of the explosion. Senator Lambert as well, under this bill, I go back to what you're talking about, credible evidence and the standards for quality there. And you're right in that when data is collected, having it verified by a third-party laboratory, knowing the calibration of the equipment, knowing that the equipment is of a high enough quality to give good data is very important. But going to then, if you're collecting this credible evidence, that Amendment 39 prevents communities from actually using it. That even if they're meeting this high standard of collection.
Maybe you could talk in reference to the current bill as it is, because it.
I'm so sorry, yeah, I didn't get
What section are you talking about?
It's the section that talks about the paraphrasing it, it's talks about that it can't be used solely to bring an action. That was introduced there, and it's if you have this credible evidence, what else could a community group get?
Well, and I guess that comes back, did you say you're an attorney?
Yes,
All right, and when you're in court, it's very important that you have credible evidence. Wouldn't you agree?
absolutely.
In situations, you want to make sure the person who is operating the equipment is accurate, they've gone through certain standards. And isn't that important when you're going to be doing a fine or a regulation or, looking at an air permit? Wouldn't you want credible evidence that you would want it verified?
I would, but I'd also want to know that credible evidence that I've collected that's being held to that same standard that LDEQ is held to could actually be used for something.
Well, if it's credible, then it could be
It
used.
can't. The way that amendment is, it says that it cannot be the sole source of that. And I don't know what else community groups could get. I don't know what other information they could have besides the data, credibly collected data from their air monitoring to then bring a civil action. I don't know what other evidence they could get.
But as far as a regulatory penalty, not a civil action, then you could still, in a proceeding with the department, you couldn't use it.
No. The way it's written, no, you could not. You couldn't go to LDEQ and say, we have this, and if LDEQ refuses to act, you need more
Would you say your
information.
evidence, no matter what it is always credible?
If you're going through the standards that are proposed in here, that's the same standards that LDEQ is held to, and I think we would want to say that LDEQ's air monitoring evidence is credible. So yeah, but what the language does here is it creates a credible high standard for the data that's collected, but then says that very high quality data you've collected, you now need something more to go to court with, and I don't know what that something more could be for a community group that puts all the resources they have into doing this air monitoring.
I guess it would be whether or not the people who are actually working it for the community, or they have the qualifications to do it, where it's coming from, wind, and things like that. Wouldn't that all play into effect?
That's all considered in that when you talk about the necessary verification from the third-party laboratories. That's all part of that accreditation that they do there in terms of validating the data.
Well, when you say a third-party laboratory, are you talking about just the machine you're using? Because a third-party laboratory may not be out there on site.
That was another thing that was written into the amendments. I'm sorry, I don't have the full text of the amended bill. It was written in that all the data has to go through accredited third-party laboratories as well in order to be considered. So it's holding that, and that's the same standard that
Well, wouldn't
we
you
see for
kinda-
industry,
Wouldn't
too.
you think that that would be a good thing, that you'd have a third party looking at it? Because, I mean, let's be realistic. Sometimes you got people who are pushing things that may not quite always be honest on both sides. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I don't think we're arguing about, we don't object to having standards of equipment for monitors. But what this leads to is if you're having this incredibly high standard that we're talking about, and I think we're agreeing on this, that yes, you want to have a chain of command, know where the
Chain of
samples have been.
custody and so
know
forth,
where
and
they've
make sure
been.
the evidence is,
Make sure it's high quality, but then
but I think what
it
this
limits what
says,
community groups can do with it. It says you've done all of this, you've collected the best quality data that is possible to be collected, and it's been verified as much as is possible to be verified, but now you can't go to LDEQ or the court with it, despite all of the steps and costs that you've taken in getting this data. Now you are limited in what you can actually do with it.
I think it says it solely can't be used, which would
That's
basically.
my question: is what else would be
Well,
needed?
that's kind of, sometimes I think you want corroborating evidence. I mean, it's just because I say something doesn't mean it's true.
Well, that's why you get into court, but that's, having that as a sufficient evidence to bring the action, and then when you get further evidence once you're in court, but the way it's written, it doesn't even let you go to court with that evidence alone.
Wow.
So that amendment was the one that stuck out the most as far as taking this bill from a sufficiency of data, of a holding, having a standard for community-led air monitoring programs. It took it from that to then limiting what is possible for communities that take all of the time and effort to try and do something about their air. I'll go ahead and close there. I'm happy if there's any further questions.
I don't see any, so thank you. We also have Tish Taylor is present and would like to speak in opposition. Vicky Booth, present and in opposition, would like to speak. And Asti Davis Robin. Ladies, if y'all will introduce yourself, and I guess we can start from y'all's right. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Asti Davis Robbins, and thank you for your time today. I'm from a small community called Alson, Louisiana, which is a community located in North Baton Rouge that has been plagued with more than its fair share of environmental burdens, from landfills to plastics. And that's why I committed my professional career to helping communities to understand the environmental conditions and hazards that surround them. I'm a true daughter of Louisiana, a product of both Dillard University and Loyola College of Law, where I earned my JD with the certification in environmental law. And I've been working at the intersection of environment and climate for over a decade now. I am the Director of Climate Justice at the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice, and today I stand before you in opposition of this bill that will encumber citizens by placing unnecessary regulations on the findings they make in regard to air quality. Louisiana citizens have invested in air quality monitors to supplement the lack of monitoring being done by state and federal agencies. Organizations like LEAN, Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, and the Bucket Brigade were born out of the necessity to empower people with actual data that could be brought forth to ignite investigations into toxins that were endangering their lives. The federal standards referenced in this bill arise from Title 40 CFR 50. Upon evaluating the text, I believe the scope of the monitoring and enforcement of these standards was set forth with industry and governmental entities in mind, created, open quote, to protect public health and welfare, close quote. Forcing NGOs to adhere to these standards is in opposition of the congressional intent. Placing these burdens both financially and operationally on non-governmental community-based organizations whose sole purpose is to protect the lives of their loved ones is extremely cumbersome. Having the ability to collect data, even on a low level, has enabled communities to report foul play and increase public safety. This time last year, EPA was proposing an emission reform here in Louisiana due to the continuous air pollution being dumped on communities not being regulated wholly. As Senator Connick pointed out, these efforts do not implore LDEQ to act or investigate, even if air quality monitoring is done up to this scale. Setting these standards and forcing community groups to spend funds in order for their data collection to be considered credible would, when these restrictions don't even exist across the country, would deplete the already limited funding that community groups are functioning with. The intentions of this bill would be much better served putting more comprehensive guidelines on industry and governmental enforcement agencies instead of regular citizens. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Robin and Ms.
Tish Taylor.
Taylor. All right, Ms. Taylor.
I am a resident of Cancer Alley. I live in LaPlace, Louisiana, born and raised in Reserve, Louisiana. And I'm here because I cannot believe, once again, our state is actually still trying to tell us that this doesn't exist and trying to take the power from us to be able to monitor our own community. Everything that you do is censoring the community instead of the people that's actually poisoning us. How much does it take for you to actually emphasize this energy on cleaning our air, our soil and water? Instead, you're policing us, but EPA is not, well, LDEQ is not policing the industry that's polluting and killing my family? How many times do we have to come to you, who we put in office to serve and protect us, to fight and actually set rules and guidelines to protect the people in this state, that you come back and say, never mind, you're still a sacrifice zone. You don't deserve anything. The community does not deserve to have the power to understand and to actually share information that EPA has approved. The monitors are approved by EPA. So you're taking away my ability to have clean air, water, and soil. Thank you for that. You're taking away my ability for my body to fight off chemicals that actually mutate. They change my DNA. You've taken that away. Now we have autoimmune diseases, cancers, neurological diseases, endocrine diseases, cardiovascular disease. You suppress our immune systems. So that means that this parish, St. John the Baptist Parish, had the highest death rate from COVID in the country, per capita, in the country, for the month of March and April, and stayed in the top 3 for months later. Our parish has the highest hospitalization from asthma attacks, hospitalization rates in the country, in the state. That's not normal, but we don't have the ability to control that. We can't control our illnesses. You blame it on, I guess, what we eat. You blame the victims for everything. And you say that if we want you to regulate these industries that's poisoning us, that they might lose money. And we don't want them to lose money and get up and leave, so it's okay. Because your community is in a sacrifice zone. You've already been designated okay to die. Look at me. I represent a community that is dying every day from rare diseases that do not exist anywhere else. And that's normal. That's just like the rest of the state, right? No, it's not. It's Cancer Alley. We deserve every bit of respect that the white prominent communities have when it comes to air quality, water, and soil. We don't get that. We are disposable. We are considered an embarrassment to the country because of the way you treat people in Cancer Alley over industry. The Chemical Association is here for industry. They're not here. They don't care about our community. No one cares about our community. When you look at me, you know there's more people like me. There's actually other people too, not just black, but in general, we work hard every day of our lives. We pay our taxes. We take care of our communities. We spend our money in our communities. But these industries, they don't have to pay taxes, so our communities are dying. They don't have to actually even hire us, even though it's a fact that St. John the Baptist Parish is the worst in the country, #1 in the country for industry not actually hiring the community for what it's poisoning. We are #1 for the worst of everything when it comes down to taking care of our communities. And who's responsible for that? The people here now that's trying to tell us that our community can't even control a monitoring system that actually is approved by EPA and funded by EPA. You're telling us that we're not worthy of any of this. Thank you.
Ms. Booth?
So good afternoon. My name is Vicki Booth. I moved to New Orleans 5 years ago after a 33-year career with EPA and CDC as an environmental engineer and epidemiologist. One of my areas of expertise includes the generation, transport, fate, and regulation of criteria and toxic air pollutants and their impacts on population health and child health. Appreciate the opportunity to comment today on SB 275. The language that caught my eye and actually puzzled and then concerned me is section 2383.10, prohibition on use of monitoring. It says the prohibitions under this section apply to use by the department or any persons of any monitoring data not in compliance with this chapter for the purposes of alleging violations or noncompliance with the Clean Air Act, Louisiana Environmental Quality Act, or any other applicable law, rule, or regulation for which the state has primary enforcement authority. So I don't know. I trust the Louisiana Chemical Association representatives and others that said that was not the intent, to prohibit the distribution of this information or the making it publicly available. But I can also see where it might be interpreted that way. And above and beyond that, I'm concerned with how you might enforce such a regulation were it to pass. So I don't know, are any of you familiar with purple air sensors? Okay, so when you get a chance, I recommend that you just open your browser and type in purpleair.com. And once you're on the site, select the real-time monitoring map. Type in anywhere Louisiana, and you will see that there's approximately, it looked like maybe 20 to 30 purple air monitors online today. So so first of all, Purple Air is a private company, and they are located in somewhere, Utah, that I have never heard of. Let's see. Oh, Draper, Utah. And when you buy a Purple Air sensor, you also buy the ability to upload that data and have it hosted on the user-friendly Purple Air website on its platform, and so that you can access it and all 60,000 sensors that are available worldwide. So my concern is if this, well, that raises a lot of issues. So let me say that EPA worked with Purple Air, and so did many, many state environmental agencies for more than a decade, to ensure that the data is valid, reliable, and in agreement with EPA federal reference monitors at least 92% of the time. These monitors that are in Louisiana, I know for a fact because I helped cite some of those monitors as part of a couple of small grants 3 years ago. And they have been up there for at least 3 years, and many of them, including the one at Xavier University, has been up there for even longer. And so my concern is, how would you enforce any type of ban against using that information to allege noncompliance? Are you going to contact the Purple Air Company and tell them that they can give us our money back and take our data off the website? Are you going to prohibit them from selling the monitors to us in the future? So those are the types of issues that that raises with me. And I am not an attorney. I don't want to be an attorney, but I did consult with several environmental attorneys ahead of this hearing. And several were concerned about perhaps infringements with free speech. But a couple of the others were concerned, especially if it relates to this example, with violation of the Commerce Clause in the Constitution. So I'll just leave you with that.
All right, you worked with EPA?
Yes, sir,
All
for
right.
14 years.
Okay, and you were in the New Orleans region?
No,
Where?
sir. But I was an expert witness for EPA Region 6, U.S. versus General Dynamics.
Okay, but when you worked for the EPA with the plant, did the EPA do air monitoring in the plants in the river parishes?
So I really wasn't all that familiar with what was happening in Louisiana while I was at EPA. Louisiana has had very few areas of noncompliance, and
Wait, it's
we're
had very few areas of non-compliance?
with the clean air, so the National Ambient Air Quality Standards.
So in other words, the air is fairly good, I guess you would say, if it doesn't have many, is that what you're telling me? Or that's what I'm interpreting?
So I would not say that, and I could not say that, but
But it doesn't have a whole lot
So-
of violations.
not of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Louisiana has the highest air toxics related cancer risk in the country. As a matter of fact, the neighborhood that Ms. Taylor is from and her family is from, their air toxics cancer risk in from 2009 to 2018 was 1,505 in a million. The national average is 30. So their cancer risks were 50 times higher than the national average, the highest in Louisiana, but there is also neighborhoods within St. Charles Parish whose cancer risks are over 800 in a million. EPA's action level is 100 in a million, which is why EPA came to reserve Louisiana in 2016 in order to start working with the community. And that's the reason they did an unannounced inspection at the Dinka facility and identified up to 50 violations of the Clean Air Act. So even though it had just been, so the LDEQ monitor had been out there and inspected the facility twice during the previous 6 months and found absolutely no violations. So it has an air toxics hotspot problem.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Booth.
Welcome.
Is there anything else, ladies? Is that, okay, thank you.
I'd like to just say one more thing.
Yes, ma'am.
My grandson made 2 years old in March. My daughter had him. He was premature, low birth weight. Stayed in the hospital for 3 weeks afterwards. He's actually autistic, and he actually has exceeded his level of exposure, his lifetime level of
Cancer risk.
exposure of cancer risk
Accepted cancer risk.
at 2 years old. So what happens to him at 3? What happens to him at 17? That matters to us because we're dying. You don't see it, but we live it every day. We take care of our people that are dying. And then every time we go to the doctor, we're asking, is it us next? What are we breathing when I'm outside with my grandson playing? What is it that we need to know what's going on in our community? We need to have the right to know and to actually advocate for clean air, clean water, and clean soil.
Thank you. Also present and not wishing to speak, but in opposition is, I didn't see, you. Did you have, oh, I'm sorry. If y'all could come back, ma'am, I didn't see Senator Presley had a question.
I've got a couple questions for you, if you don't mind. I appreciate y'all coming and testifying, and I did a quick Google search while you were sitting here, and I found pscleanair.gov, which is a Puget Sound clean air website, talking about purple air data. And according to this governmental website, it says that the raw data are about 2 times higher than the real values.
So
Is there a response to that?
Yeah, there is. So did you type purpleair.com into your browser?
I just did a Google search of purple air,
If you-
and this is one of the governmental websites that came up.
So I'm
That's
happy.
discussing it.
So on the Purple Air site, you can look at raw data, or it gives you an option to look at EPA data.
Okay.
And the EPA data has a correction factor, and that's what they worked with the Purple Air Company for over 10 years to develop. And when you apply that correction factor, then the EPA, so the EPA monitoring that does meet 40 CFR Part 50 air monitoring standards, it matches those values 92%, at least 92% of the time, except for in some areas in Alaska and in some very high in the code purple.
So they place some factor involved, or put some factor involved in it to regulate it down to the EPA standard?
So Purple Air worked with EPA and many other environmental agencies. Purple Air worked to improve the validity and reliability of their data. And then EPA worked with them and many other states. One project involved 30 state monitoring in 30 states across the country. And they, through all of that monitoring, developed an algorithm. It's an algorithm that adjusts in those cases where the raw data, and nobody really uses raw data, but the raw data shows concentrations twice of what EPA does.
So Purple Air has acknowledged that their testing doesn't properly show the amounts of air in space. They have to require an algorithm that then reduces it to the EPA standards. Is that appropriate?
Well, it
Is that
doesn't
correct?
reduce it. So Purple Air sensors is about $350 a piece,
Okay.
right? And no sensor is going to meet the same exact raw data. In fact, even some of the data EPA collects is adjusted for certain anomalies in the way that it's collected or processed by the devices, right? But they fixed that, and EPA stands behind their fixes.
Well, they fix it through some sort of
Algorithm.
calculation algorithm, acknowledging that there's a 2-time higher standard by this test than the test that's used by the EPA. Is that correct?
But they caution against using the raw data.
Okay.
In fact,
I guess
they
I'm
say
just
don't
confused
use-
if
they say
this is.
don't use any of the data except for the data that has been scientifically adjusted for the anomalies in the way that it's collected.
Or at least mathematically adjusted for the
It's
changes.
automatically adjusted.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, no, it's real-time adjusted. You can see the EPA adjusted values. In fact, you select that so you don't see anything else. You don't see the raw data.
Okay.
And it actually has adjustments for other countries. That was done similar to the way that EPA and Purple Air worked, because both of agencies, both Purple Air and EPA is invested in people having access to valid, reliable data that's accurate.
Yeah, and I think everybody agrees that valid, reliable data is important when we're having these discussions. So I appreciate you answering my questions, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Anybody else?
Thank you, Senator Presley. It looks like that's it. All right, also present and not wishing to speak in opposition is Andra Henry, Power Coalition. Yuki Banks, Power Coalition, opposition, not wishing to speak. Tom Costanza, Louisiana Conference of Catholic Bishops, present in opposition, not wishing to speak. Janice George, Power Coalition, present in opposition, not wishing to speak. Destiny Hamilton, Power Coalition, present and not wishing to speak. And Eva Williams, present in opposition, not wishing to speak. Kim Voudries Goodale, present in opposition, not wishing to speak. Ronald Grace, present. In opposition, not wishing to speak. And Jack Reno Sweeney, present in opposition and would provide information if requested. Is anybody? Okay, thank you, Mr. Sweeney. And then we also, I think, have a number of emails. We have a number of emails that'll be made part of the record that are in opposition. All right, at this point, I'll go ahead and close on the bill. Basically, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, basically what this does, I think it just adds another thing of reliable data that we want to make sure that when we're doing any type of fines or any type of penalties, that that we have credible evidence. And I think that's pretty much what the bill does. All right, Mr. Representative, Senator Connick.
I have a question for Brian.
And Mr. Chairman, I think Mr. Greg Bowser wanted to close.
Oh,
Say a few
okay.
words.
I
if that's
didn't see
okay.
a card, Mr. Bowser. Did you?
He snuck in.
Okay.
He snuck in.
Mr. Bowser can answer the question. Are you guys?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, no, reading the room, this is going to pass. But how, looking at the letter from the EPA, and it says, credible evidence revision rule adopted in 1997 makes clear that various kinds of information other than that reference test may be used to demonstrate compliance or non-compliance with emission standards. How do we get around that with this legislation when you have the preemption issues?
I'll let Danny have a.
And won't this cause a challenge in court?
Thank you, Senator. That rule deals specifically with the different, and it speaks to that if you read the register notice that when the rule was promulgated in 1997, that speaks specifically to testing methods versus other types of evidence. So as the legislation is written, it doesn't preclude those types of other means, whether that be olfactory means of sniffing and that sort of stuff, of detecting odors or whatnot. What it simply means is that this data, as air monitoring data, has to meet the same testing standards. And the register notice, and we weren't able to do a complete workup of this, but the register notice does speak to the fact that it doesn't preclude the testing standards that are present for air quality data.
All right. Should not the court determine what evidence is credible and not credible after the litigation is filed?
Certainly. And I do want to address one point that was made, that this legislation says in no civil, that it precludes inclusion in any civil penalty or civil case. That was amended out. That is no longer in the substituted bill. So a court could decide what is credible or not credible, but that is not as part of this bill.
Okay, one last question. This concerns the human factor here. The lady who came up and testified, didn't get her name. How do you address her concerns about a 2-year-old autistic grandson with these issues? How do we protect them?
Mr. Chairman, Greg Bowser with Louisiana Chemical Association. Mr. Connick, I think you bring up an interesting point. And when you listen to the questions that Mr. Presley proposed, you see why there needs to be a standard. Because when you look at the results and from air monitoring, it's all over the place. I mean, he read a quote to you where EPA looked at the same study and said something different because of different reasons. And I think to address the lady's concern, one of the things we want to make sure of is that you have the correct things in place. You don't want people who do air monitoring. What if it's wrong? What if what they did was wrong? What if it wasn't the right readings? And then we go for years, and then when you put some standard in place, all of a sudden you get the right information. And I think this bill was not intended to stop anybody from doing any kind of monitoring. The intention of this bill was to make sure that if you do air monitoring and you expect the regulators who are there to protect our air and to protect us, if you expect them to do something, then you at least go through a protocol that's set by the federal agency and the state agency, that they will have some assurance of what was done properly. This is not an intent to hide anything or to do anything to stop people from doing anything. You can continue to do monitoring. You can have a monitor get a grant from the federal government and get on the back of a bicycle with the monitor and still collect data and then go down to the newspaper and release it. This doesn't preclude you from doing that. What this precludes you from doing is the shortcutting the system, collecting air samples, and running to the DEQ and say, hey, you have to go take a look at this. I have a problem that's registered here. And then they have to go and react to what you have, not knowing if the evidence was tainted, if the evidence was collected properly, any of that. And all that's all this bill does. Doesn't do any of the things that we heard here today or prevent anybody from continuing to doing what they do. All it does is says, if you're going to do it and you want it to be credible, you have to go by a set of standards. And that's all it does.
I think the people that live in St. James, St. John in my area, they don't have air monitors, they have noses. And when they
Understand.
smell something that burns and stinks and something's wrong. But this has been an issue ever since I've been here.
And you and I have talked about this for years, and I've come out and visited your district and saw what you were talking about. The thing of it is, though, you may have disagreement of where that's coming from.
You point fingers at each other. All right, that's all I have.
Yeah.
Thank y'all.
All right. All right. I've gone ahead and closed on the bill. I don't see anything else. I'm going to move favorably on substitute Senate Bill 275. Is there any opposition? I move to report. Seeing no opposition, Senate Bill 275 by substitute is reported favorably.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Comes in? Yes. He throwing a no-hitter. He pull me out, he comes in, throws one pitch. Yeah, he flies out.
That's it. That's right. That's right. All right. Once you say, all right, Senator Stein, no further business before the committee. Senator Stein moves to adjourn. No opposition. Committee is adjourned.